3 years ago, I received a letter that changed everything. I remember staring at my computer screen while my brain was trying to process what I had written, and my heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, drowning out the surrounding sounds. My fingers trembled as I reread the lines over and over, fearing it was a mistake or someone's malicious joke. "Congratulations on your promotion to Senior Marketing Director." These words froze in front of my eyes, as if someone had etched them on a monitor. It took me a moment to notice that the next line showed a new salary. But when my eyes finally got to that figure, a muffled sigh escaped my mouth. The amount was almost twice what I had earned before. I was sitting in my small, cramped room, which looked more like a cubicle than a full-fledged home, surrounded by stacks of documents, an old laptop, and cups with dried remnants of coffee. Like many of my peers, I struggled to make ends meet, paying off student loans, counting pennies for rent, and having to share an apartment with a neighbor. Every trip to a cafe or a spontaneous dinner with friends had to be carefully planned so as not to exceed the budget. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. My name is Rachel. I was born and raised in Ohio in a middle-class family with my parents, Tom and Linda, and my older sister, Kate. Kate has been married to David for a long time, and they have 2 children, Emma and Jack. We were never rich, but my parents always tried to make sure my sister and I had everything we needed, and I appreciated their efforts, even if sometimes it meant that we had to save for something. The first thing I did, when I could speak, was grab my phone and dial my mom's number. "Mom, you won't believe this." My voice trembled with emotion as she answered. "Rachel, what happened?" There was concern in her voice, but I hurried to reassure her. "I got a promotion, Senior Marketing Director. The salary. Mom, you can't imagine how much higher it is." There was a short pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard a cheer. "Oh, honey, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." Her voice was trembling with emotion. "You're coming this weekend, aren't you? We need to celebrate this." I couldn't refuse. That evening, I bought a bus ticket, and 2 days later, I found myself at my 2-story house, where I spent my childhood. When I went inside, they were already waiting for me. Kate and David had arrived earlier, and now their children were running around the backyard, squealing with delight. The aroma of homemade lasagna was in the air, mixed with the smell of fresh garlic bread. We sat down at the table, and I talked about my new role, the projects I would be overseeing, and shared my thoughts about the future. My family seemed genuinely happy for me, and it filled me with warmth. During dinner, Mom filled everyone's glasses with wine and, looking up, said with a smile, "You know, I've been thinking about having a real Thanksgiving this year. Not just us, but Uncle Jim and Aunt Barbara, maybe even Cousin Steve and his family." "That's a great idea, Mom," I said, taking a sip of wine. "The only thing—" She hesitated, her voice becoming a little less confident. "Because of all these extra people, I would like to cook something special. I found a recipe for ribs in a cooking magazine. It's just great, but it needs expensive ingredients, and special cheeses for snacks." She didn't finish, but I didn't have to. I immediately understood where she was going. "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. "Oh, it's only about $250, Mom said with a slight relief in her voice. "No problem. I'll transfer them to you tomorrow," I replied, feeling an almost childish sense of pride that I could now help my family without harming myself. Thanksgiving was a great success. Mom beamed, accepting compliments for the ribs and cheese plate, and I enjoyed the feeling that I was able to make it possible. Then Christmas came. "Rachel, honey, I want to cook something special for a festive dinner." Mom's voice sounded cheerful on the phone. "This time it will be something absolutely amazing." "Of course, Mom. What did you come up with?" "I have some great recipes, but the ingredients are expensive." She laughed, as if embarrassed, but I already knew what would happen next. The amount increased to $300. At Easter, $350. On the 4th of July, Mom has planned a grand barbecue in the backyard. I got used to these conversations. They became something natural, and I didn't see it as a problem. I was making good money, and it seemed right to help my parents. But by Thanksgiving next year, something had changed. Mom didn't call with a request anymore. I just got a message. "Hi, honey, I'm planning a Thanksgiving dinner. Meeting, $800. Translate it by Friday." I love you." I froze, staring at the screen. 800? It wasn't a request, it was a statement. I felt something tighten inside me, but then I shrugged and made the translation. During dinner, I noticed something else new, and it made me pause for a moment with a fork in my hand, staring intently at the contents of my plate. The food no longer looked the same as usual. Instead of the usual homemade dishes prepared by my mother, there were exquisite snacks neatly arranged on trays in front of us, which looked like they were made by professional chefs. There were miniature pies with goat cheese, tartlets with smoked salmon, tiny portions of risotto neatly served in glass glasses. All this seemed clearly alien among the usual meat casseroles, mashed potatoes, and fragrant homemade bread that I used to see in my parents' house. "Mom, these snacks are amazing," I said, bringing a small spoonful of delicious mousse to my lips. "A new recipe?" I asked this question, knowing full well that I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from her. "Oh, I ordered them at that new place downtown." She waved her hand as if it didn't matter at all. "No one has time to cook everything from scratch anymore. Besides, they do it better than I ever could," she added with a slight smile, taking a sip of wine. I didn't know what to say to that. It would seem that what is strange here? After all, many people prefer to buy food rather than spend hours cooking complex meals. But something in her tone, in the way she said it so easily, as if it were a matter of course, caused me to have an unpleasant feeling in my chest. It was not the cozy family dinner it once was. Something has changed. Winter turned to spring, and then summer again, and I noticed how our family gatherings became more and more intricate, as the guest lists grew, as the menu became more complicated, and the costs associated with all this increased at an alarming rate. With each holiday, Mom cooked less and less, and restaurants and catering services appeared in our house more and more often. Messages about money began to arrive not only on big holidays, but also just like that, without explanations, without requests, but rather in the form of dry instructions. I got used to these requirements, and although sometimes I had an unpleasant feeling in my stomach after sending another transfer, I didn't allow myself to think about it for too long. Money came and went. It was normal. I bought a new car, moved into a more spacious, beautiful apartment, and enjoyed the feeling of independence and success. But at the same time, I noticed that my savings were not growing as fast as they should have given my salary. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I went to my parents' house for dinner. Kate, David, and their children were already there when I arrived. The house was full of the usual noise. Children were running around the rooms, laughing and arguing. Mom was busy in the kitchen. Dad was sitting in the living room, looking through the newspaper, and Kate and David were having an animated conversation about something. After hugging and exchanging news, we finally sat down at the table, and Mom, pouring wine into glasses, casually said, "Well, we're going all out for Thanksgiving this year." I stopped with a fork in my hand and looked at her, frowning slightly. "What does that mean?" "Well," she continued, smiling, "I want to invite the whole family, Uncle Jim and Aunt Barbara, all the cousins, even Great, Aunt Mildred." "That sounds nice," I said, helping myself to green beans. "Kate and I have already planned the menu." Mom continued to speak as if it had already been decided and was not subject to discussion. "We're going to order everything at that new upscale catering restaurant. They're making an amazing presentation." I slowly put down my fork. "Order everything?" "Yes," Kate said. "Mom and I have already calculated all the expenses. That would be about $3,000. I almost choked on my green beans. "3,000?" I repeated, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Yes," Mom said, as if we were discussing something as insignificant as the cost of a loaf of bread at the supermarket. "I also invited Cousin Steve and his family to stay with us, but they can't afford train tickets." I slowly looked up. "So what?" "Well," Mom shrugged, "I told them that you would pay for their round-trip expenses." I blinked, feeling a cold wave of irritation rise inside me. "That's another 1,000, Kate kindly clarified. "So that makes a total of 4,000. I looked from one to the other, trying to figure out if they were serious right now, but their expressions left no doubt. 4,000? I repeated, feeling like everything was boiling inside. "Yes, dear." Mom smiled at me, as if she had just asked me to buy milk on the way home. I put my fork down on the table and, taking a deep breath, said in a flat voice, "I'm not paying $4,000 for Thanksgiving." There was silence. The looks of the shocked people at the table might have seemed funny if they weren't directed at me. Kate slowly put down her fork, looking at me as if she saw me for the first time. "Rachel, you always pay for the holidays," she said, sounding puzzled, as if I'd just announced that I wasn't going to celebrate Christmas anymore. "That's how we do everything now. Don't complicate the situation." "Rachel." Mom said my name in the tone I remembered from childhood, the way she used to say it when she was disappointed and ready to lecture. "I already promised Steve that we will pay for his tickets." I jerked my head up. "I've booked a table at the restaurant," she added. Something snapped inside me. "It's not my problem," I said, feeling the anger bubbling up inside me, bursting out. "You should have asked me before making promises with my money." I looked at the screen of my phone, at the festively set table, at the smiling faces of my relatives, at the living room of my parents' house, familiar to the smallest detail, and something inside me was slowly but surely emptying me from the inside, as if someone was twisting my soul, leaving nothing but a cold void. The words in the caption under the photo, these deliberately warm words imbued with artificial sincerity, pierced me sharper than any knife. Those who really value family. So I don't appreciate it. So I'm not a family. I was crossed out, excluded, banished, and all because I refused to pay for this table, for this meeting, for the opportunity to be among them. I waited for the pain to subside, for the first blow of betrayal to pass. But the longer I looked at this photo, the deeper it dug into my heart, leaving deep wounds there. I swiped my finger across the screen, zoomed in on the image, peering into the faces of the people who have been closest to me all my life. There was my mother, with the same familiar smile that had always seemed warm to me, but now seemed somehow alien. There's Kate, looking full of smug satisfaction, and next to her, David, looking a little tense, but certainly not so tense as to go against the general trend. Dad, who once protected me from even the smallest childhood insults, sat with his usual serious expression on his face, as if the whole situation did not concern him. They all looked happy. Without me. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I quickly closed the app, throwing the phone on the couch as if it were a hot coal, but the image was already imprinted in my mind. I replayed over and over in my head the moment of our last dinner, when my father called me selfish for the first time, when my mother gave me an ultimatum, when Kate, my own sister, agreed with her without a single hesitation, as if it were something self-evident. What about me? I just left, and they let me go. I got up from the sofa, feeling my hands tremble, went into the kitchen and automatically turned on the kettle, although I didn't want tea at all. I just didn't know what else to do, how to deal with this sticky, heavy feeling of rejection that was suffocating me from the inside out. I couldn't even imagine that Thanksgiving would be so empty, so cold, so alien. Several hours have passed. The day turned to evening, and the city outside lit up with thousands of lights. But I didn't move, just sat with my hands wrapped around the mug and stared at one point until the phone vibrated again. I shuddered, grabbed it, hoping, for what? For a late invitation? An apology? It was a new photo from Kate. I opened it, even though I already knew what I was going to see. The children were playing in the living room, adults were sitting around them, and this time the caption read, "How much I love my family." I couldn't stand it. Anger flared up in me instantly, a hot wave sweeping away everything in its path. My fingers typed a message by themselves. So I'm not a family anymore? I sent it to Kate and immediately felt my heart tighten in anticipation of a response. A few seconds passed, then a minute. The reply came quickly, as if she was waiting for me to write. "Rachel, you made your own choice." I read these words and couldn't believe that my sister, my own person, could say such a thing to me. Did I make the choice myself? Yes, I did. I chose not to pay for other people's holidays. I chose not to be treated like a wallet. But does that mean I chose to be alone? Does that mean I deserve to be crossed out? I wanted to say something, but I couldn't think of the right words. I just stared at the screen until anger gave way to desperate, heavy disappointment. A couple of minutes later, I received another message from my mom. "I'm really sorry that you didn't want to be with us on this day. I hope you will understand that family is all about sacrifice and compromise." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Sacrifices and compromises. I wonder why all the sacrifices have to come from me. I turned off my phone and tossed it aside, feeling tired, as if the whole day was dragging me down, like a weight too heavy to carry. Fireworks exploded outside the window, multicolored flashes reflected in the glass. But for me, this holiday was over before it even started. I got up, went to the bedroom, lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. I thought about how many times I had turned a blind eye to their requests, to their expectations, to their need for me not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a convenient financial resource. And how many times have I convinced myself that this is normal, that this is what good relatives do? But now, lying in a dark room all alone, I wondered if they had ever really needed me, or just my money. I flipped through the comments, feeling a strange mix of emotions, from sincere joy for myself to a bitter taste of regret that did not want to go away, despite all my efforts. My friends were genuinely happy for me. My relatives, those who remained on my side, congratulated me, but there was not a word from my parents and sister. I didn't even expect them to write anything, but the part of me that had hoped for reconciliation until the last moment still felt a painful pang when not a single one of them appeared among the hundreds of comments. I closed my phone and tried to distract myself by sorting through the boxes. The new apartment was spacious and bright, with large windows facing directly onto the park, where the first spring trees were already blooming, filling the air with the sweet scent of fresh foliage and moist earth after the recent rain. I imagined how I would arrange the furniture, what paintings I would hang on the walls, how in the morning I would go out on the balcony with a cup of coffee and look at the city coming to life. It was my place, my space, my life. 2 days before the housewarming party, I received my first unexpected message from Kate. It was short, without greetings, without unnecessary words. "Did you really buy a new apartment?" I stared at the screen, rereading the question, feeling a strange, unpleasant feeling growing inside, like a premonition of something inevitable. I wanted to ignore the message, but something made me reply. Yes, I bought it. The answer came almost instantly. "I'm just surprised. I thought you were saving up for something more important." I frowned, feeling a slight wave of annoyance. What was that supposed to mean? What could be more important than investing in your own home, in your own future? "It's important to me," I wrote back, and no further messages were received from her. But a couple of hours later, I got a call from my mother. "Rachel?" Her voice was even, too even, as if she had memorized every word in advance. "Did you really buy an apartment?" "Yes." I gripped the phone tighter, anticipating where this conversation was going. It was unexpected. There was tension in my mother's voice, barely perceptible, but I knew her well enough to notice. "Didn't you think it would be better to discuss this with your family?" "Discuss it?" I asked, feeling the familiar wave of anger rising inside me. Why on earth would I need to discuss buying my house with someone who didn't even wish me a happy birthday? Mom paused. I could almost hear her inhaling deeply, choosing her words. "Rachel, you've always been part of the family," she began, and I almost laughed. "We just didn't expect you to make such a big financial decision without us." "And since when do you care about my financial decisions?" My voice was sharper than I'd intended. "Oh yeah, it used to be important to you when it came to paying for holidays and travel tickets." "Don't start," she cut me off, and I could imagine her lips pressing into a thin line. "It's just, are you sure you can pull off the mortgage? Maybe you should have consulted with your father first." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before answering. "I'm a grown woman, Mom. I earned this money. I calculated my expenses. I made an informed decision. I don't need to ask permission." There was silence on the other end of the line, which lasted so long that I thought she had already hung up. But then the mother spoke again, and her voice became cooler, tougher. "I hope you understand that now you won't have any extra money to help your family," she said, and it wasn't a question. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone, and a fire of rage flared up inside me, hot and fast. "That's it." I almost laughed, but it came out empty, devoid of joy. Is all this concern about my financial situation just a way of telling me that now I can no longer be your wallet? "Don't turn everything upside down, Rachel," she replied irritably. "It's just a decision. It changes the dynamics." I clenched my teeth in disbelief. "Dynamics?" I repeated. "You mean I don't have to pay for your whims anymore, and that bothers you? You're being unfair," she said sharply. "We have always supported you, and it would be wise if you also thought about your family." I shook my head as if she could see me. "Supported?" I asked again. "Did you support me by sending back my Christmas presents, ignoring my birthday, rejecting me when I first said no?" Mom didn't say anything. "You're right," I continued, feeling my voice tremble treacherously. "Now the dynamics have really changed. And I'm glad of that." I hung up before she could answer, and for a few seconds I just sat there, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my blood, my heart pounding in my chest. And then there was another call. I looked at the screen. Kate. I ignored him. Then again, and again. I blocked the number. They disowned me when I refused to pay, and now that I've invested in myself, in my future, they've remembered me again. But not because they were bored, not because they loved me, but because they realized that their financial source had finally dried up. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled. A new chapter, a new house, a new life. The door was still open, but it seemed to me that the air in the apartment had become heavier, as if stretched to the limit. They really did it. They showed up uninvited, even though I made it clear that I didn't want them in my house. Mom stepped inside first, confidently, as if it were her apartment and not mine. Her gaze swept across the living room, assessing the space the way she always did when she came to my house in the past, the look of a hostess deciding what needed fixing. "Sorry we're late," she announced loudly, as if she was really expected, as if I hadn't told her that I didn't want them to come. Her father followed her, silent, with a kind of guilty expression on his face that I hadn't seen on him before. He muttered, "Hey, Ratch," he said, avoiding my eyes. Kate lingered on the threshold, clutching a bottle of wine in her hands, as if this could somehow smooth over what had happened. "You have a really good place," she said softly, and there was none of the assurance in her voice that she usually spoke to me with. It sounded almost like a confession, almost like a peace offer. I was too shocked to say anything right away. I automatically took a step back, allowing her to enter, and then realized that I had made a mistake. The guests in the living room fell silent, noticing the new arrivals. Uncle Jim and Aunt Barbara, Cousin Steve, my friends from work, everyone who had come at my invitation was now watching this scene with awkward tension. I turned my gaze to my mother, who was standing in the center of the room, as if she owned this space. "Do you really think you can just come here like nothing happened?" My voice was steady, but anger was bubbling inside me. Mom raised her eyebrows. "Oh, Rachel, come on," she drawled, crossing her arms over her chest. "We're your family. Shouldn't a family be together at such important moments?" I felt something explode inside of me. "Family?" I grinned, feeling the bitter taste on my tongue. A family doesn't kick their kids out when they stop paying for parties. The family does not return Christmas gifts marked unwanted package. My family doesn't ignore birthdays and then suddenly shows up when something good happens in my life. The father, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. "We just wanted to see you, Ratch. You said it was a housewarming party." "I said friends and family," I said sharply. "Family. Those who treat me like a person, not like a bank account." I saw Mom's lips tighten into a thin line. "You're acting like an ungrateful girl," she said icily. I looked at her and suddenly realized that I had power in this conversation. They came to me, to my house. They expected me to give in, as always. But I was no longer the Rachel who was ready to give up. I took a deep breath, then pointed at the door. "Go away." "What?" Mom frowned as if she couldn't believe her ears. "You weren't a part of my life when I needed you to be. Don't try to become a part of it now." There was a tense silence in the room. Mom sighed heavily and took one last look at me, the one that always said, "You disappointed me," and headed for the door. The father hesitated, as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. Kate stayed the longest. "Rachel." She shook her head, but there was a note of something like regret in her voice. "Goodbye, Kate," I said softly. She lowered her eyes and followed her parents out. As soon as the door closed behind them, there was a sigh of relief in the room. Uncle Jim clapped his hands. "Well, I think now we can raise a toast to the real family." Everyone laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was really free. I looked at Uncle Jim, feeling the tension being replaced by fatigue, heavy and viscous, like a wet coat that I had been wearing for too long. His words sounded sincere, but there was a bitterness in them that made my stomach clench. A family shouldn't treat each other like that. Yes, you shouldn't. But that's exactly what mine did. I looked around the living room, which still had an echo of the recent scene. The wine glasses frozen in the hands of the guests, the looks filled with both sympathy and awkwardness, the heavy silence in which the discomfort of witnessing someone else's family drama was clearly felt. I didn't want my holiday to turn into this, but I had no choice. My mother always knew how to draw attention to herself, and she didn't need permission to make a scene. I took a deep breath, then clapped my hands, trying to lighten the mood. "Well," I said, trying to make my voice sound light, "I think it wasn't the toast I had planned, but since it happened, let's raise our glasses to a new home, a new chapter, and most importantly, to those who are really there when it matters." There was a murmur of approval in the room, the tension began to dissipate, and gradually the evening was once again filled with conversations, laughter, warm light, and the feeling that this was my home, my space, my life. Uncle Jim clinked his glass with me with a smile, then with Aunt Barbara, and soon the guests were talking among themselves again. The music filled the apartment, and I felt the oppressive weight of the past gradually receding, giving way to lightness and even joy. Kate was the only one who didn't disappear into the crowd. She was standing against the wall, clutching a glass of wine, but not taking a sip. Her gaze swept across the room, but invariably returned to me, as if she was about to say something, but did not dare. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to go over and ask her what was on her mind, but the other part, the one that still hurt from the betrayal, resisted. Kate was my mirror, a reminder of what our family could have been like if it hadn't been for greed, if it hadn't been for their desire to control my life and my money. But before I could make a decision, she took a step forward on her own. "Rachel," her voice was low, almost inaudible against the background of the lively conversation in the room. "Can we talk?" I nodded, leading her to the balcony where it was quieter, where no one could overhear us. She bit her lip as if gathering her courage, then spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, and there was more than simple regret in her voice. I didn't realize how far things had gone." I stared at her, waiting for her to continue. "I was mad at you," she confessed, "because it seemed to me that you just turned your back on us when we needed you. I didn't see the full picture. I didn't realize that Mom was really manipulating all of this." She shook her head, staring off into the darkness of the night city, and then sighed. "But now I understand, or at least I'm starting to understand." I was silent, because Kate's words, even though they were what I had wanted to hear for many years, could no longer heal old wounds. "It doesn't change everything that happened," I finally said. "But if you really want to understand, you'll have to see for yourself." She nodded. Her gaze was serious, adult. It no longer had that frivolous confidence with which she always went through life. "I know." We stood there for a few minutes, each with her own thoughts. Then Kate exhaled and smiled softly. "Can I at least stay at the party?" I looked at her, and then, unexpectedly, even for myself, I grinned. "Only if you bring me another glass of wine." She laughed, and it was a laugh in which there was no tension, only lightness. When we returned to the living room, the party was already getting back on track. Uncle Jim was telling some funny story, and the guests were laughing out loud. The music filled the apartment again, and I suddenly realized that despite all the chaos, despite the unexpected visit of my parents, despite this conversation with Kate, I was happy. Because finally it was my place, my life, and no one else could take her away from me. I put the phone down on the table, took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to feel the tension go away with the air. But despite this, there was still a heavy lump in my chest. I just did something that I've been thinking about for a long time, but I didn't dare. I put an end to it, cut myself off from these people who were supposed to be my family, but turned into a constant source of pain, pressure, and manipulation. On the one hand, it was liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt free from their influence. No one else could make me feel guilty for just living my life and making my decisions. But on the other hand, despite all the anger, despite the months of resentment, there was still bitterness. I used to love these people. I once believed that family was a support, a safety, a place to return to at any moment. I ran my hand over my face, then picked up the coffee mug again, which had already started to cool. A sip of the bitter drink helped me collect my thoughts. Now that they couldn't contact me anymore, what's next? I couldn't allow myself to sink into self-pity or doubt. I knew I had done the right thing, and I needed to move on. The phone vibrated again, but this time it was a message from Sarah. "How are you?" I smiled, feeling warmth spread across my chest. I still had people who cared about me. "Much better than I expected," I replied. A couple of minutes later, the reply came, "Megan and I are going to have a drink tonight." I glanced at the kitchen clock. It was still early, but the prospect of spending the evening with friends, talking about everything except family and all this drama, seemed incredibly tempting. "Of course," I sent a short reply, then got up, finished the rest of my coffee, and went into the shower, letting the warm water wash away the remnants of tension. I spent the rest of the day sorting through the last boxes. I was pleased to put my new home in order, arrange things the way I wanted, without regard to other people's tastes and expectations. It was a strange but pleasant feeling. For the first time in a long time, I felt that this place really belonged to me, that no one could come and demand something to change, because it was their home too. I was sorting through the books, arranging them neatly on the shelf, when I heard another message. It was Uncle Jim. "If you ever need support, financial, emotional, whatever, know that you are not alone." I smiled as I reread the message several times. "Thank you, Uncle Jim. You have no idea how much this means to me," I replied. By the evening, I was fully prepared to meet my friends. Choosing a simple but comfortable dress and light makeup, I felt the remnants of a hard day finally receding, giving way to anticipation. It was my first evening after the whole story, when I could just be myself, without having to defend myself, justify myself, or prove something. We met in a small, cozy bar which was located near my new apartment. Sarah and Megan were already sitting at a table by the window, chatting and laughing, and when I approached, they immediately made room for me. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked when I settled on the couch and took the first sip of my cocktail. I thought about it for a second. "Honestly," I said, glancing at them, "better than I expected." "Easier." "Of course it's easier," Megan said, crossing her arms. "You've finally stopped carrying that suitcase without a handle." "I know, but..." I hesitated, choosing my words. "It's a strange feeling. I understand that they were wrong, that it hurt me, that they treated me unfairly. But still, they're my parents." "Just because they're your parents doesn't give them the right to treat you like that," Sarah said firmly. "Family is not only about blood. These are people who love and respect you, who support you rather than take advantage of you." I nodded, realizing she was right. "You gave them a chance," Megan added. "You tried to reach out, explain, but they didn't want it. Now you have the opportunity to surround yourself with those who truly deserve to be in your life." I looked at my friends and smiled. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" asked Sarah. "For being with me, for reminding me that I'm not alone." We clinked glasses, and at that moment I felt that maybe everything was just beginning. A new apartment, a new life, new boundaries that I set for myself. I took a sip of my cocktail and suddenly realized that for the first time in months, I felt truly free. It's been a month since that last conversation, and sometimes I find myself checking my phone, half expecting to see a message from one of them that would somehow break the lock, whether it's an apology or a confession, whatever, as long as it means they finally figured out how they were very wrong. But there's nothing. The silence is as oppressive as before, and I'm still waiting for them to realize that their treatment of me as a walking bank account was wrong, that I, not just a source of funding for their social aspirations, but a real daughter and sister, and I hope that one day they will see me as a person, not just their own benefit. Meanwhile, life goes on, and I've gradually settled into my new apartment, making it truly my own with every painting I hang and every plant I take careful care of on my balcony. The garden blooms under the summer sun, and I enjoy the fresh herbs for cooking and the vibrant flowers that brighten up my morning. My job keeps me busy and satisfied. I have embarked on a new marketing campaign that challenges me creatively and brings me recognition from the company's management. And the promotion that started this whole family drama turned out to be the success I had hoped for professionally, even if it created unexpected complications in my personal life. My social calendar remains full, and I'm enjoying this new phase. Sarah and I started hiking weekends once a month, exploring trails a few hours away from the city. Megan convinced me to join her book club, which introduced me to both new literature and new friends, and I even went on a few dates. Nothing serious yet, but nevertheless, it's fun and casual. Uncle Jim and Aunt Barbara, who have always been real supports for me, made it a rule to include me in small family gatherings, trying not to invite my parents to the same events. Their support meant more to me than they might have realized, reinforcing in my mind the idea that a family does not have to be toxic or transactional. However, the pain is still there, especially on quiet evenings when memories come back unbidden, and I miss the family I thought I had before my promotion revealed their true priorities. I miss my niece and nephew who are too young to understand why Aunt Rachel is no longer around. But the acute pain has gradually turned into bearable, and I no longer cry when I see photos of family events on Facebook that I was not invited to, and I no longer rehearse arguments in my head, thinking about everything, what I should have said. I've come to terms with my decision to set boundaries, even when those boundaries meant alienating the people I once loved. Sometimes, sitting at my panoramic windows and watching the lights of the city at night, I wonder if they will ever change, whether my mother will admit that her behavior was wrong, whether my father will find the courage to stand up to her, whether Kate will ever understand that her interests are also important. But despite I hope they do, because they're still my family, and part of me is still waiting for them to come back, but I'm no longer putting my life on hold waiting for their approval or acceptance. I now know my value, and it's not measured in dollars or how much I'm willing to spend to maintain visibility. My life isn't just a set of requirements to meet or a list of things to do. I began to realize that my true strength lies in being myself, discovering my desires, striving for my dreams, and not being afraid to put myself first. I've learned to take care of myself in a way that no one else could, and that's probably my biggest victory. Knowing that in the end, I'm the only one responsible for my happiness. And although there are still many challenges ahead of me, I am now ready to face them with an open heart, knowing that I have the support of true friends and loving relatives behind me. And most importantly, I, Rachel, am strong and independent, ready to live my life the way I want it.